Welcome to part number 2 of the shocking truth about food labelling. All right, so we've lost the sort of the nutritional information. We're now going to look at a little bit more of what's written on the box. So we're going to be looking at sort of the marketing terminology they use, and we're also going to be looking at what you could say that like the Food Standards Agency and the role they play. The Food Standards Agency are in the UK. There might be different ones for different countries, but definitely the UK is the Food Standards Agency. So the Food Standards Agency is a relatively sort of young company, set up in sort of 2000, in the year 2000. So you're not even talking sort of 11 years old, and they're an independent body. So they're an independent company, separate from the government, and it's their role to help protect the public interest with regards to our food. Okay, and all they do for the government is they serve in an advisory role. Okay, advisory role to promote food legislation. So they don't set the rules. They just let them know what's happening with food, so the government set the rules. So they can only advise, they can only give information. It's the government and the people that set the laws that put these in place. So if the Food Standards Agency go to the government and say this product contains this, or this ingredient shouldn't be included in foods, the government can still say, well, we're gonna sell it anyway. Or they can say, we're not going to sell it. The Food Standards Agency, they're only there in an advisory role. They just advise. They don't do anything else but advise. They don't set the rules. They just advise. That's all they do. So current food production labelling and manufacturing are governed by the 1990 Food Safety Act. Okay, so that's food production, labelling and manufacturing. Okay, so again, the Food Safety Act is completely different from the Food Standards Agency. The Food Standards Agency, again, they just advise. The Food Safety Act, they sort of govern the manufacturing, labelling and production. All right. So the FSA, or Food Standards Agency, they're charged with sort of protecting the general public's interest on both food and safety standards. So again, they're sort of working in our favour, you could say, but what they're saying might not be taken on board by the government or the Food Safety Act, or whoever's setting the rules, as it were. So the government sort of can pick and choose what they want to say about different products. So that's just sort of who the Food Standards Agency are, and sort of how they're acting in our, you could say, in our favour, or whatever. But again, it doesn't. What they say is not taken as law or rules. That's not set by them. That's set by someone else. So that's the Food Standards Agency. That's who's sort of working in our favour as the general public. But again, like I keep saying and keep repeating, it's only advice. It's nothing more than advice. So they can only put ideas forward of what to do. They don't say what to do. So moving on now, marketing terminology. Now you might not be able to see this, but that little label there says good source of fibre. So that is one way that they're marketing this product. So it's a good source of fibre. That's one way they're marketing it. Now, as we saw in the last video, there was 17 grams of carbohydrates, and only 3 grams of that was fibre. So they're saying 3 grams is enough. Well, no, they're not actually saying it's enough. They're just saying it's a good source. But what they're not saying, that it's also a good source of dietary sugar, because there is over double the amount of sugar than fibre. So again, they're not lying, you could say, as a good source of fibre, because 3 grams might well be a good source of fibre, but what they're not telling you is that there's over double, there's 7 grams of sugar in there. Plus, again, if we look here, you can see all the other ingredients that are in there. So it's not just a good source of fibre, it can be a good source of partially hydrogenated palm kernel. It could be a good source of corn syrup. It could be a good source of sorbitol, which is what we'll come on to later. It could be a good source of distilled I'm going to forget that one. It could be a good source of vegetable oil. You know, it could be a good source of a lot of things, but they're saying it's a good source of fibre. They're also calling new flavour. Now, new flavour is raspberry cheesecake. So what most people would expect or have the perception of is that there's raspberries in there because they have pictures of raspberries. Now, coming back to the ingredients, we can see there is up here, because it goes in descending order, so this is the highest amount, this is the lowest amount. So of the highest amount, there are no raspberries there. 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 So again, this is getting less and less amount. There are no raspberries there. There are no raspberries there. Again, there's no raspberries there. Oh, and here we are. Raspberry puree concentrate. Okay, 2/3 of the way down. So you could say there isn't a lot of raspberry in there. Well, there isn't. You could say there isn't any raspberry in there, but there is a raspberry puree concentrate to give it flavour. So again, when it says new flavour, raspberry cheesecake, and they have a couple of raspberries on there, really doesn't mean that there's raspberries in there. There is, though, raspberry puree concentrate. Alright, so I hope this is sort of waking you up to food labelling, but what we're going to do now, we're going to explore a little bit further around. So we're going to move away from sort of the Kellogg's. I'm going to leave it up there because there's no need to move it, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about other terminologies that can be used. So these companies, they can use, you know, different terms in the selling of their products. We all know that there are loads of terms out there, and this is sort of, I mean, it didn't all start off like this, but as sort of marketing has evolved and as people's habits have evolved, it's sort of turned all these different ways of marketing into sort of a fierce competition. So everyone's going, you know, you'll hear words like natural, authentic, homemade, traditional, farmhouse, things like that. You'll hear all that. They're now being used because it's such a competitive market that everyone needs to sort of sound unique and sound fresh and different and new. So the Food Standards Agency, again, they sort of help in with this, and they provide many guidelines and legal requirements in the use of these terms so that so they're not misleading. And that's probably the biggest part of it, is that they're not misleading. Is when they're written on there, as we come to the definitions, which we will do later, you'll understand that what they've written on there essentially isn't false. It's just they don't sort of tell the whole truth, if you know what I mean. So just to give you some sort of stats and everything, the Food Advisory Committee, another sort of agency, they reported that up to sort of 75% of consumers found the terms fresh, pure, natural to be misleading. So there is really still work to be done on these, and I want to sort of explain and sort of define all the different, well, not all of them, but some of the different sort of terminology that can be written on packaging. So fresh. Now, the definition of fresh is to differentiate food sold a short time after harvest. So how long's a short time? How long's a long time? What's the difference between short and long time? Is it 1 day? Is it 1 hour? So to differentiate food sold a short time after harvest. So, you know, how long is that short time? You know, a long time might be a week, and a short time might be 6 days. There's still that vagueness about it where they're able to sort of push the boundaries of it. Then you move on to pure. So a single ingredient food, or to highlight the quality of the ingredients of the food. So again, that doesn't really tell you that it's pure. It's just a single ingredient foods. It's not. It's just saying there's one thing in there. It doesn't, it's not how pure it is. And again, to highlight the quality, what do they mean by quality? What's the definition of quality? So there's still a lot of vagueness in there. Then you've got natural, which is comprised of natural ingredients. Not the work of, it's not man-made. So again, natural, it can still be plied full of sugar, because you can get natural sugar that hasn't been touched by the hands of man, or it's not man-made, but there can still be 100% sugar in there. All the carbs that are in there can still be 100% sugar, or it can be 100% saturated fat. So natural, when you see natural on there, again, you've got to check the food labels to see what is natural. Is it natural sugar? Is it natural fat? Whatever it might be. So it's just sort of honing your skills at looking at food labels. Then you've got authentic, so remains unchanged, originates from the area implied by its name. So authentic, again, it just remains unchanged. So again, it can be sugar, it can be saturated fat, it can be, all these different types of food, but they just remain unchanged. Doesn't necessarily mean they're good or bad, it just means they remain unchanged. Traditional, a method of preparation that has existed for a significant period. So traditional, again, it doesn't have to be that it's a healthy tradition, doesn't have to be a good tradition, it's just existed for a significant period. That's the definition. If they fit that definition, then it can be as good or as bad as they say. Then farmhouse. So other than bread, which is interesting. So other than bread, it should refer to that produced on a farm. But again, that's just a farm. Doesn't tell you about the quality of the farm. Doesn't tell you about the sort of the cleanliness of the farm. Doesn't tell you about the quality of the farm. It's just produced on a farm. So there you go. There's your farmhouse. Just produced on a farm. Then you've got original, so a method of preparation that has remained essentially unchanged over time. Again, that means absolutely nothing when it comes to good or bad. It's just exactly as it says on the tin, a method of preparation that has remained essentially unchanged. If they don't change their preparation for 20 years, they've got it as original. If they don't change it for 25 years, they've got it as original. Again, it could be full of fats, could be full of sugars, could be full of additives, preservatives, sweetener, whatever it might be, as long as it hasn't essentially remained essentially unchanged over time, then for them that works. So moving along now, we've spent a little bit of time on those. So when it comes to healthy marketing terminology, so now we're sort of turning into like the lights, the lows, reduced or high in or whatever it might be. Reduced or low fat, low calorie, sugar free, all those types of things. So our bars here don't really seem to fit in there, but we've sort of discussed our good source of fibre. But we'll now just have a look at sort of light, low, reduced or high. So there are a number of specific guidelines for these terms, and they should not mislead. So if it's light or low or high, they're not saying that there's a guideline. They're not saying it has to be 50% lower or 50% higher or 75% lower. It could be, there's no specific guidelines, it could be 5% lower, it could be 1% lower. You just don't know. Without looking at the label, you just don't know. So you've got to take the time to look at the label to see, okay, what's it saying it's reduced in? Look at it, how much is it reduced? If it is reduced a lot, what have they put in its place to make it up for it? Because here's a nice interesting one. Has anyone heard of xanthan gum? ZYTHAM gum. Now what they put that in is low-fat mayonnaise. And what that does, that's a thickening agent. Because in full-fat mayonnaise, it's the fat that gives it the thickness. In low-fat mayonnaise, they take all the fat out, so it's just a watery, like a white watery fluid. So they need to thicken it up to make it look like mayonnaise. So they put this xanthan gum in. Now, xanthan gum is the fluid which is made by the bacteria on rotting cabbages. Okay, that's the thickening agent. So you're better off having the full fat. Yes, you might be getting the fat, but you're not getting this this fluid which is made by bacteria on rotting cabbages. Okay, so that's just so if they say low-fat mayonnaise, yes, it's low-fat, but it's high in xanthan gum to give it the thickness, which is a chemical. Sorry, not a chemical, which is a fluid made by the bacteria, which is basically helping the cabbage rot. So you might start thinking, well, that's not the best in the world. Then we moved on to reduced and low, so must be at least 25% lower in fat, but often calories are maintained by adding other ingredients. Okay, so like I said, again with the xanthan gum and the low-fat mayonnaise, yes, it's 25% lower. It hits that criteria, but made up with the xanthan gum. Okay, so low calorie. Now, must have lower calories than the original, but no set level. So again, 1 calorie. 1 calorie lower, it's lower in calories. Simple as that. It can be 20, it can be 30, it can be 50, it can be 100 calories lower. But the criteria states it could be one calorie lower. Even sugar-free. Sugar has not been added, but almost always an artificial sweetener is. So you'll get things like Diet Coke, no sugar in it, but aspartame, and we'll come on to what these are later on. So again, looking at the labels, that you could say doesn't really mean anything. So when you're looking at low fat or low calorie, again, what's it saying? It's only saying it can be lower. Doesn't mean how much lower, just lower. Okay, could be 1 calorie lower, could be 1 gram of fat lower, whatever it might be. Okay, so next video we're going to be looking at food additives and the labelling of those food additives. Okay, see you soon.